Now I'm incredibly excited to introduce Dr. Daniel Glaser from Google DeepMind, who has a fantastic keynote speech prepared. So enjoy.
I can't tell you how happy I am to see you all back here. I mean, like, the worst thing I have to say is that if it was me in your position, I would definitely still be in the bar. So I would like to salute your commitment to this evening. And I can also give you a promise I will not talk for more than, I guess, kind of agreed, but 25 minutes. So it'll be a brief but punchy keynote. I just want to thank Hedvig and Annette and the Foundation for inviting me to this. It's been an extraordinary day, some of which I've seen and some of which I haven't. I've heard the shockwaves and the reverberations of the discussions. And what I feel is that it has been broad both in terms of geography, scope, reach, and also in terms of time. It's not a competition, but I do want to start even before the Renaissance. I mean, seriously, it is a competition. But I'm from Google DeepMind, but I'm not speaking on behalf of Google DeepMind. I guess, if you like, I'm an honorary fellow at the Institute of Philosophy in the University of London, if that would help for affiliation. I'm going to refer to some stuff we're doing at the moment in Google DeepMind, which is about building a new space, and I'll talk about that at the end. And as you probably know, one of the projects, perhaps the central project we're doing there, is building a thing called AGI. Does anyone know what AGI stands for? Yeah. Artificial General Intelligence. And so we've been thinking quite a lot about the notion of general intelligence, the G in AGI. And I guess the reason why I want to go back in time is because when we think about general intelligence as opposed to specific intelligence in biology, you could think about a crow, right? So crows are really good at hiding things. And they're also really good at remembering where they've hidden things. And they actually kind of have social cognition. So if a crow is hiding something and it notices that you're watching it hide something, then it will wait till you've gone away, and then it will come back and hide it somewhere else, right? So they have this very specific intelligence to do with what's called caching behavior. And they have a degree of, like, even time travel, future stuff. But they're really rubbish at playing chess, okay? And they can't plan for dinner. You know, there's a bunch of things that they can't do despite this one intelligence. And the weird thing about humans is that something strange happened about 30,000 years ago, between 30,000 and 100,000 years ago. And the thing that happened was a bunch of things. And that's the first point I want you to take away from this evening. The things that happened, and we know this from records of, you know, archaeology, a bunch of things happened. One is tool use, so they started using tools. The second was the development of language. The third was an even more advanced than crows' form of social cognition, so they became really good at thinking what other people are thinking, inhabiting the minds of others. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But the other thing that they developed at the same time, and the critical point here is we don't know what led what, right? We don't know what came first. They all happened at the same time. Something evolved, something happened. But the other thing that they did at that point was that they started to make art. And we can't distinguish when we look back the time they developed tool use, which I would guess is, I don't know, an innovation or something, like perhaps innovations of different kinds. The time that they developed language, that they developed social organization, and they developed art. And so for me, and I know I'm not here to talk about the avant-garde, that was the previous guys, thank you. That was a really great panel. I really enjoyed it. I'm kind of like before and after that. We can't say that art led, and we can't say that art followed. What we would say is that art is integral. It's indistinguishable in its origins from the origins of the things that make us human. And I'll come back to AGI, the artificial general intelligence, towards the end. But it does feel to me as if, even if the task were possible of making an artificial one, we wouldn't know we'd succeeded until it started to be artistic also, to develop and to appreciate art. And we'll come back to that as well. I'm going to talk about people, places, and things that are connected to innovation and art and culture and institutions. And in a funny way, my starting point is halfway around the world, quarter of the way around the world from here. Who here can identify the following landmark? Yeah. Who here has actually swum in the infinity pool at the top of that building? Ah! I thought it would be a crowd that would be, that we don't normally get more than a few hands. So the top of that thing there, is my mouse on? Yeah, no, not so much. Anyway, the top of that thing there is a swimming pool. And it's the top of the Marina Bay Sands development in Singapore. Marina Bay Sands is interesting for a number of reasons, not least the infinity pool. It's a casino. And those of you that know anything about Singapore know that that's a weird concept, right? Because if you think about the way that Singapore is organized, the idea of building a casino there is not the first thing that you would put to, to complete the picture of what Singapore life should look like. And one of the interesting planning conditions to the Sands Corporation when they built Marina Bay Sands was that the condition for them building the casino was that they had to have a cultural institution as well. And it was actually the architect of the development, a guy called Moshe Safdie, Israeli-Iranian-American architect, who chose an art science museum, which you can see in the front there on the right, as the centerpiece of that development. And my friend, some of your friends I'm sure as well, Ona Haga, who's just announced that she's moving on from Art Science Museum after a few years, had the most hilarious museum curator job in the world, because the other people on the board that she was part of were all directors of casinos across the world, right? Literally from Las Vegas and everywhere. And so when they went round the table saying what their next project was, they were upgrade the slot machines and all this sort of stuff. And she was like, well, I've got this really interesting project looking at nature in the context of developments in technology. But the interesting thing for her as well, and people have been talking about money, if the museum closed, they had to shut the casino as well. And so if you're looking for institutional motivations for making art work and art and science work, this is, I think, probably my favorite example of that. And I guess I want to talk about how you can build institutional structures and institutions and connections between people so as to support innovation and artistic practice. And I'm going to argue that it would be foolish to see them in opposition, although sometimes it's necessary to argue for one over the other in the funding context, as we heard previously. My own history with this actually goes back to 2002. I'd just come back from Israel. I'd finished my PhD, and I'd always been interested in building spaces where people who see the world differently can interact. That had been my interest. And by chance, so not through any fault of my own, I found myself as the scientist in residence at a place called the ICA, the Institute of Contemporary Arts in London. And I guess you can see from this photo, even if you don't know it, it itself is quite an interesting institutional collision, because it sits very near the heart of government, very near the British Council, as was in fact, on the Mall, and, but it sets itself up in opposition to all kind of established structures of knowledge and power. It's supposed to be the home of the avant-garde. And one of the things that they did that was innovative was to have a scientist in residence. And while there'd been artists in residence in scientific institutions previously and in companies and so on, there'd never been a scientist in residence before. And the thought was that, I mean, first of all, that's interesting, right? Like often it's omissions that give people away. And we could talk more perhaps another time about the relative power structures that meant that no one had thought of embedding science into art, whereas plenty of people had thought of bringing art into science. And in that place, I began to think about the structures that you need to build in order to make effective connections, interdisciplinary connections, connections between people who see the world differently in order to foster innovation and to make progress on the problems that matter to us all. It was the first time they'd had a scientist in residence there anywhere, and quite a lot of people were talking about art-science collisions. And I mean, I'm honored, humbled, and delighted to see colleagues of mine in this project, and I'll refer to some of the work we've done in the past together. But art-science collisions are nothing new, my friends. And it heartened me, slightly oversharing, to note that in the year of my birth, which was 1968, the show Cybernetic Serendipity was mounted at the ICA in London, that location. This was an exhibition that was curated by Yasha Reichart, who I'm happy to say is a neighbour of mine in North London, and we meet at Ronnie's in Belsize Park and have coffees and lament the state of the world. And she's still curating. And this was an exhibition of artworks, all of which were made by machines. And I think in the current, when people talk about their surprise and argument and discussion and question about whether artificial intelligence systems can generate art, Yasha was problematizing this notion already then. And she was problematizing it in a formal way, right? She was putting on art made by machines in an art gallery. It was an art show because it was an art gallery, so a curator. And that definitional juxtaposition, I think, is really important, that labeling things is interesting. One of the consequences of that meeting of art and science in that location was meetings of people. And I feel really frustrated with myself when I was looking back over my emails. So who are the two people in this picture? The woman is Princess Margaret, obviously, the late Queen's late sister. And And the guy, I don't know who he is. He looks really like my dad, funnily enough, who started off life as a chemist and then became a scientist. And he looked exactly like that and would have dressed like that to meet Princess Margaret at the ICA. Sorry, but it's there to be. Yasha told me who it is. He's an artist who was working at the time, but I forget the name. Does anyone know? No, we don't know who it is. All right. Anyway, so one of the things that happens when you build structures which allow people to see the world differently is that people who wouldn't ordinarily meet do. And it's from those collisions, those interactions, that interesting things happen. And you have to curate that, right? You can't just expect that they will bump into each other in a pub or whatever, although that's useful also. But you have to build structures which allow people to interact with each other. And that building of structures is super important to me. And as I said before, the reason why it's interesting and important is because we are social creatures. It's very important to us what other people are thinking. And in fact, there's one thing you can see just by looking at this picture. Where would you say their attention is, these two? Any thoughts? Where are they looking? They're looking at each other. And we can see that from the picture. And the reason we can see that from the picture is because we're exquisitely interested in what other humans are interested in. Right? That's of great interest to us. I would almost argue, I do argue, in fact, that our own sense of ourself comes both evolutionarily and perhaps individually from our sense of others. That's how we construct the social world that we inhabit. And interestingly also, if you look at this, and this is a just so story, I can't give you evidence for this. It's the fact that we are the only primates who have whites of eyes. So if you look at the sclera, that's the bits around the iris, in other primates, they're dark. By the way, how they trained that monkey to pretend it was looking at itself, but actually, those of you that have done film, to angle the mirror so that actually the monkey's seeing the camera so that the camera can see the monkey's eyes. When people look like they're looking at themselves in mirrors in films, they're actually looking at the camera because that's what, anyway. So primates don't have whites of eyes except for humans. We have whites of eyes. And the question is, why did we evolve whites of eyes? Why did we evolve whites of eyes? And the most plausible, the only plausible account of that is so that we can tell where each other are looking. Okay? The benefit of having a white of eyes is that other humans can see where the humans are looking. Because if you have a dark circle surrounded by white, you're very sensitive then to the exact direction of the eyes. The eyes are the fastest muscles in the body. They move very quickly. And the center of our vision is very good at reading and seeing colors and things. The periphery is rubbish at that. The periphery, the edges of your vision, is just to notice interesting things that you ought to pay attention to in case something's coming from your right. Okay? So we're very, very good at seeing where people are looking. And that exquisite tuning to that is at the root of our own social cognition. And in fact, if you think about expertise, for example, in art, this picture's been up for a while, and I can tell you for free, because we did this as an experiment, if you look at the eye movements of those of you in the room who are trained historians of art, if we look at where you're looking on that picture, you'll be looking at different places on the picture than the rest of us who are just mugs who look at pictures, right? So your expertise is betrayed, is displayed by where you look, okay? So I can tell what you're interested in by where you look. And also when you're giving talks and the lights are up as they are a little bit in this context, I can tell who's paying attention to me because I can see where you're looking. And that's all because we evolved whites of eyes. So we're exquisitely interested in that. And that vision of each other is how we shape our sense of people. It's a dominant sense. I'm here mostly to talk about visual neuroscience, because I'm a visual neuroscientist historically, even though I now build spaces for engagement. So as a visual neuroscientist, you're interested in how seeing works. And again, and I'm going to go even before the Renaissance again, but there was a sense, a prevalent sense, even into the Renaissance, that the way that seeing happened was that you sent out seeing rays from your eyes that sensed the world, okay? That's how you sent out a seeing signal from your eyes, and that sensed the world out there by feeling. By the way, why is that not a stupid idea? What animals do we know that do sense the world that way? Bats and dolphins, right? So echolocation, they send out these sound waves, they bounce back, you get a sense of the world, okay? But actually, already 500 years earlier, somebody had worked out that wasn't true. Who made this picture? Who reads Arabic? It must have some Arabic. Yeah. And so it's Ibn al-Haytham. Ibn al-Haytham, about 1,000 years ago, working near Baghdad, did this picture. What's it a picture of? the eyes, it's a horizontal slice through the eyes and the optic nerve at the back. I'm really sorry to say that I don't have time to tell you about the crossing point at the bottom of that image there. It's incredibly interesting. And he, by dissecting, made some, but I don't have time to tell you about it. But anyway, Ibn al-Haytham, who made that thing, reasoned that actually it's not the case that seeing rays come out of the eyes to feel the world. His reasoning, by the way, was if you look at the sun, you can damage your eyes. And he said it's not like you've sent seeing rays out of your eyes to the sun and the seeing rays got burned, right? It must be that something's coming from the sun and going into your eyes, okay? So from a physics point of view, information flows into your eyes through photons, and we process that information. But, my friends, this is the key point for the talk. Seeing, in a biological sense, is not like that. Seeing is done by projecting meaning out into the world and testing it. And your prejudices and your expectations and your education change what you see, because seeing is done by projecting meaning and testing it in the world. And to demonstrate that, I want to show you the most exciting phenomenon found in visual neuroscience of the last 30 years, in my view. And this is a tricky one, because to show it, I have to kind of, well, you'll see what happens. So who's seen this image before? Right. Okay, so please don't talk. Try not to talk. You're going to be laughing, but don't talk. Okay, so if you can see right now a blue and black dress in the picture, put your hands up now. If you can see right now in this picture a white and gold dress, put your hands up now. Fantastic. So what's interesting about this picture, and I've used this a lot, is that it depends a lot on the illumination in the room and the projector. Okay? And the other interesting thing about it is that people who put their hands up for blue and black, who are sitting next to people who put their hands up with white and gold, get really vexed. Right, exactly. So this couple, they're vexed. And they get vexed with each other. And it's very difficult to keep the talk going because they're each arguing with this thing. So pro tip, if you press B on the keyboard during a presentation, it makes the screen go blank. Did you know that on PowerPoint? Okay, so I'm going to do that. So would you like to know how this image was generated? And again, this is a very annoying story for me as a visual neuroscientist, because we've not managed to make another one like it, and it was generated completely by accident. Okay? So here is the true story of how this image was made. And again, remember, we're talking about innovation and how we can understand the world better. So the kinds of transgressive sharing that the internet has allowed also gives rise to phenomena like these that would not have been discovered otherwise. So it was February 2015, and I wrote it down because I think it's funny. Grace and Keir Johnston of Colonsay, Scotland, were getting ready for the wedding of one of their close family friends, and they went to a dress shop in Cheshire. And they found a dress to wear to the wedding. She wasn't the bride. And she took a picture of the dress and sent it to her friend to ask for her opinion. And her friend said, "It's a nice dress, but are you sure you want to wear a white and gold dress to somebody else's wedding?" And she said, "What are you talking about? It's a blue and black dress." And her friend said, "Well, it may be a blue and black dress you're looking at, but you just sent me a picture of a white and gold dress." And so it went, okay? So the interesting thing about this phenomenon, and we didn't have examples of this before in neuroscience, was that something as basic as the color of the dress can be, I'm going to say, a matter of opinion, or what we might say, a matter of perception, right? Because if we think about what seeing is supposed to be like, there are things out in the world, and the information flows into our eyes, like Ibn al-Haytham said, and then you construct a percept from that, and that's what you see. But of course, what you see isn't like that. What you see is a hypothesis that you have about the world, which you test by looking. And your cultural background and your artistic background and your practice and your history will change that. Okay? I mean, who wants to know how the phenomenon works? Okay, well, some of you, okay, it's also quite late, and I'm the last thing before the bar, so I'll tell it you quickly. Basically, we evolved as primates in the forest, and we had a very varied diet, including berries. And some of the berries were red and some of the berries were white, and it was quite important to distinguish between them because some of them were poisonous and others weren't. But there was a problem, because at sunset, when you're foraging in the forest, then the white berries look red because of the red light of the sun. And in the middle of the day, some of the pale pink ones look quite whitey because the direct sunlight illuminates them. So there became an evolutionary benefit to being able to tell what color things really were, which is to say, not what was the light coming off them, because I love the lighting here, by the way, guys, it's gorgeous. Those of you at the back look pretty orangey because you're sitting under orange light, and the ones in the middle look pretty pinky because you're under pink lights, and the one look quite bluey. So your color is determined by the light that is bouncing onto you and into our eyes. But that's bad news if you want to know what the real color of the berries is. So we evolved to subtract out the illuminant light and what's left is the real color. If you look at the top right, it looks like a kind of yellowy fuzz. Those of you that see the dress as white and gold are saying, this is a dress that's being illuminated by blue light. Can you see the very top of right of the image is blue? Your brain thinks the image is being illuminated by blue light. And if this is an image taken in blue light, the dress it's taken of is originally white and gold. Does that make sense? So your hypothesis about the world changes what you see. And we've got a mock-up diagram of it for those of you that are interested. And that difference of perception, for me, was really fundamental. Understanding how we see the world. But also, I realized in about 2003 that the progress we needed to make to understand the brain was not going to come from science alone. And somebody we know very well, actually, Gillian Boddington, some of you will know, invited me to an amazing gathering called Future Physical in 2003. And I was asked to think about innovation and technology and so on. If you want to think about innovation in technology of perception and remote sensing and imaging, you should look to dance. It's dance practice in the early 2000s that used cameras and imaging and computers and motion capture in a way that was in some cases 20 years ahead of what's happening now. And this piece is by a woman called Isabel Rocamora. Some of you will know her. And by the way, this is a funny story. Isabel, if you're listening, as it were, I'm really sorry about this, because Isabel's done an amazing job of deleting all of these photos from the internet, because she's now a filmmaker, a very established and beautiful filmmaker. But at the time, she was an anti-gravity artist. And this is her and Sophie Griffiths hanging off something. And she said something to me very clever when we were meeting in 2003 at Future Physical. She said, in hanging work, she said, all movement is a metaphor. She said, in hanging work, all movement is a metaphor. And I spent the 10 years of my life trying to understand what she meant by that from a scientific perspective. And again, I'm here to tell you, as a neuroscientist that collaborates with dancers, how they talk about what they do from a neuroscientific perspective sounds like nonsense. They say, well, I've got muscle memory. My muscles remember the dance. You guys are neuroscientists, you don't have memory in your muscles. You know nothing about how the brain works. But of course, what they mean is that they have a perception of where their muscles are, what they're doing, and that changes how they move and how they see. And in fact, that investigation, that co-investigation of the brain from a movement perspective and the construction of dance is behind a lot of the most exciting choreography of recent times. This piece is by a choreographer and dancer called Wayne McGregor, and it's called Ataxia, was the piece. And the construction of it was super interesting. He collaborated with a bunch of psychologists who did distraction tasks. So if I walk along with you after we leave here, and we walk side by side, and as we're walking, I ask you to count up to 100 from 1. You will go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and we'll keep on walking. But if as we walk, I ask you to count backwards in 13s from 100, right? We'll be walking along, you'll go 100, 87, 74, you will slow down. You can't walk at full speed and count backwards in 13s from 100, okay? And that's because of a cognitive bottleneck. The same brain resources required for both. And so what Wayne did was to take his dancers into the psychology lab, do these distraction tasks with them, which made their bodies move in very different ways than they were used to. And then he wrote down those movements in his notation system and got the dancers to reproduce those movements on stage for this dance. It was called Ataxia. And interestingly, of course, it was judged as it should have been, and we'll come back to this with a show I want to talk about at the end. It was judged by the dance press to be a great success. People came to Sadler's Wells and they saw it. And no one really cared that it had been made by this collaboration between science and art, right? There was a program note about that, but to many people it would be as relevant as who Wayne was sleeping with at the time, or indeed who funded it. That's not something which changes the work. You respond to it as a dance work. And my argument for today is going to be that that's entirely right. That we should be building spaces where people who see the world differently collide, engage with each other, but that the work that they make should be recontextualized back in their home disciplines. So it's entirely appropriate that Wayne's work was judged by the dance press, not the art science press, okay, and was judged to be a success. By the way, funny neuroscience observation, after half an hour of seeing the dancers move in this strange way, then when they took a bow in the end, that looked really weird. Right? All the audience had accommodated, had adjusted to this strange movement pattern. And that got us thinking about how you see movement and how your knowledge changes movement. And again, if we're talking about making artistic work, we have to think about how our audiences are going to see it, and it's based on their knowledge sets. So we asked the question, does being able to do something change how you see it? That was the question. We spent about 3 years trying to work out how to ask the question. Who likes Seinfeld? Does anyone know Seinfeld? Okay, there's an episode of Seinfeld where George is trying to get a job, and I mean, actually all the episodes of Seinfeld, and he decides he wants to become a sports commentator, and Jerry says, well, George, most of the sports commentators, they were high-level practitioners in their sport before they became commentators, right? And George goes, that's so unfair, right? And so we did an experiment to test whether George was right. Like, is it unfair that sports commentators have generally done the sport before? And here's how we did the experiment. And again, we collaborated directly here with the Royal Ballet and with the London Capoeira School, as you will have seen from this image. And we worked with people from the Corps de Ballet at the Royal Opera House and capoeiristas from the London Capoeira School. We made capoeira sequences and ballet sequences. By the way, you didn't think when you were in the bar earlier you were going to get to watch a neuroscientist dance on stage, did you? So they did these movement sequences that use the same parts of the body. So there'd be a kind of step to the left and a movement with the hand, okay? And that movement broadly, grossly exists in both capoeira and ballet, but with very different kinematics and arm positions. So there were things that were definitely capoeira, things that were definitely ballet, and they showed them to capoeiristas and to ballet dancers in the brain scanner. And when you're seeing the thing that you can do, your brain reacts differently than when you're seeing the thing you can't do, right? So your knowledge changes how you see things. And that is known, right, to people who make artistic work, but we hadn't understood it from the neuroscience perspective. In other words, without the collaboration that we built with the artists, we couldn't have understood how the brain works. Okay? So do we need to build these spaces of interdisciplinary collaboration, both to make exciting work like Wayne's ataxia, and to make fundamental insights in the structure of the brain. Okay? I have an example, which I'm going to skip past, involving spitting and crystals and understanding new novel desalination processes, but I'm going to let that pass and talk to you about the building of institutions. So lovely to see friends here from Science Gallery London, which is a space that we built in London Bridge, which opened in 2018. And it was a space for interdisciplinary collaboration. And I want to make 2 points about Science Gallery, and then I'm going to wrap. I promise we'll be done in about 4 minutes. The first point that we made there is that the institutional transformation from the original Guy's Hospital through to a car park, through to a beautiful public square, was driven by the notion of the public value of interdisciplinarity. And the claim there, which I still think is true, is that by making world-leading science and world-class art in a space of engagement and participation, that's something worth building a new courtyard for. Back to the Art Science Museum. That genuine sense of interdisciplinary collaboration and of mutual respect should be culturally transformative, and is actually also a catalyst for cultural transformation. We raised £30 million in order to build this space. Our opening show was called Hooked, and to the point about, and the curator of it is here, sitting here at the back, telling me not to look at her, Hannah Redler-Horst. Thank you. We were really pleased with how the show went, but we were particularly pleased, given that this was kind of a science gallery in a university, that we got 4 stars from Jonathan Jones. And like those of you who know anything about the London art scene, getting any number of stars from Jonathan Jones is a pretty big deal. And we were pleased because this was reviewed as a space of art. And Jones comments on how we built it, but in the end, the artworks spoke for themselves as art pieces. They were contextualized within this interdisciplinary context, but they were works that spoke in their own discipline and for themselves. And the final point I want to make is about participation. Because for Science Gallery, and for the space actually we're building in King's Cross with Google DeepMind, we believe that there's a further thing that can happen when you get 2 people who see the world differently to interact. Experts from science, experts from art. And that is that it opens up a space for people who don't normally have a voice in public, who are disadvantaged and, we would say, underrepresented in cultural spaces and in spaces of opportunity. And in many places in the world, and I'm not here to talk about AI or the causes of anything, but for young people today, as it's described, and I think this is probably unfair to say it, prospects are not good, and voices of marginalized young people are harder than ever to hear. The demonization of the young is strong. And we commissioned through Hannah a project called The Workshop with Dryden Goodwin and a spoken word artist called Mr. G. And what we were interested to do was to take young people from Peckham and Brixton who were in fact incarcerated in a young offenders institution and therefore whose identities we couldn't reveal ethically. And we asked them about addiction. The show was about addiction. And the way we did that was by doing writing and poetry workshops, which were filmed and then drawn by Dryden Goodwin. And the drawing of the young men in the institution as they found their voice with Mr. G and described their own relationship with addiction and with drugs became an artwork in the gallery that allowed the voices of the young participants to speak. Many of them were still incarcerated at the time of the show. And it feels to me as if there's something quite powerful about the notion that you build a space where different cultural power structures collide. But in order to do that, you have to make a kind of generosity, a kind of willingness to listen to each other in each other's terms. The concept I like here is narrative generosity, the willingness to allow other people to tell your story in their terms. That's necessary for the interdisciplinary collaboration of art and science, but opening a space for interaction like that also allows the voices of unheard groups to speak and be heard. I'll end by saying that we're building a space in King's Cross called the AI Exchange, which is part of the new Google headquarters. It's not a Google branded space, it's a space to explore AI, and it's called the AI Exchange because you can't have a one-way exchange. And what we're doing in this space is building somewhere where people who are not sure about AI, those who are enthusiastic, those who are worried, those who are scared, those who know, those who don't know, for their voices to be heard and for that exchange to happen. And for me, anyway, speaking not as a representative of tonight, but as somebody who is working in one of the big tech companies that is trying to transform the world, if we don't build spaces where other voices can be heard, then we have much less chance of making the world a better place. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Daniel Glaser, for the fascinating keynote. Thank you, everyone who is still here at this hour with us, especially those who have come through from 2 p.m. this afternoon. Good evening. We began this afternoon with a proposition that the most consequential questions of our time do not belong to any single discipline. They live at the edges. And today, across 2 sessions from afternoon to evening, and a reading room and a screening room across the hall, is how we have tried to make that proposition tangible, something you can move through, encounter, and test against your own thinking. I want to begin by thanking our panelists and chairs. To Lynn, Anna, Ben, Elise, and Matty, thank you for treating the Renaissance not as nostalgia, but as a contemporary condition we're still negotiating. To Colento, Xiaoben, who joined us online, Jacob, Henry, thank you for letting us know the questions inside your work. To Annette, Tao, Anastasia, Tatio, Kay, and Cho Anxiong, thank you for sketching what the next cultural vanguards might look like, and for refusing the easy answers. And of course, to Dr. Daniel Glaser, thank you for closing the day with the kind of keynote that opens rather than concludes. To the artists, of course, contributing to our reading room and screening room, we have AP still here with us, Kwa, their collaborative work, which brings our reading room alive, and then KV, who is still here with us, contributing to the reading room, among all the other artists and writers, Monique, sitting here with us somewhere, writers, researchers who have all contributed to the reading room. And the screening room, of course, showing the work of Cho Anxiong, which is the latest animation he made in 2023. The works you have lent to this forum are not adjacent to the conversation. They are the conversation held in another register. Thank you for letting us think with you and through you. And finally, to our hosts, the British Library, and our partners, London Tech Week, Creative AI Foundation, Typework, thank you for making this forum possible. And of course, at the end, to our founder, Mu Chun, whose vision set this forum in motion, and to the dear team, Hedvig, Jenny, and of course, Maddie, Yangzi, V, Emma, Ling, Sam, Hong, and everyone behind the scenes, whose names you may not have seen on the program, but whose work made every moment of today possible. Thank you. A word finally on what comes next. Everything you have heard today is in some form a preview. Our forthcoming journal, The Future is Behind Us, issue number 3, will launch later this year. That issue has been taking shape alongside conversations like the one we have had today. Some of you in this room are already part of its pages, and others we hope will be. So please consider today a beginning, not a conclusion. The conversations we started here, we intend to carry forward into the journal and into the collaborations beyond it. Thank you for being part of this. We will see you soon. Without further ado, let's enjoy the wine outside.
Thank you.